Good morning and welcome to far distance learning. We've managed to up the ante, we've managed to make things actually worse, and now I'm teaching from home as a consequence, which means you're learning from home, and we use the word learning in the loosest possible sense as usual. Today we're going to look at Göbekli Tepe. It's an interesting subject, it's something that's come up fairly recently. And it's something that I'm interested in, and I think you're going to be interested in it too, if you can keep an open mind. And what it is Göbekli Tepe is it's an archaeological excavation in southeast Turkey, sorry. It's a megalithic architectural discovery. They're not sure what it is. Some people think it could be an observatory for watching the planets. Other people think it could be a burial site. Nobody's really 100% sure. It was at first dated about 10,000 years BC. Now they reckon at least 11,500 years old. And it's definitely the oldest temple we've been able to identify. And it's in a place that you wouldn't expect it to be. Now, according to mainstream science, conventional science, what would have happened is these people would have been hunter-gatherers. They would have been foraging for food one day and then suddenly decided, you know what, let's learn mathematics tonight and then build a temple tomorrow. And that's basically what mainstream science has got to say about this. This temple just appeared right in the fossil records where it doesn't belong. This basically shouldn't have happened. It predates Sumeria, it predates Babylon, all the ancient architectural discoveries. It predates them by thousands of years and simply shouldn't have existed, but has similar architecture. So it's very difficult to work out where these things come from, and it's upset a lot of scientists. Now I'm going to read from an Israeli newspaper. Now, normally I wouldn't touch Israel with a barge pole. It's a vile society where they still practice religious bigotry of all sorts. It's a terrible place. Whatever people say about it, they practice some pretty awful things. Not a good place, but it's a good article. So we're going to read through the article. I'm going to put some pictures on to show you what we're talking about, and then you're going to do a simple comprehension exercise off of it. So if you look on Google Classroom, you'll find that I've turned this article into a document, so you can read the article for yourself. I've also given you a link to the article so you can follow along with me. So if you go to Google Classroom now, you can find the text document, you can find a link to the article, and those of you that want to can simply follow along as I read the article out. Israeli archaeologists find hidden pattern at world's oldest temple, Göbekli Tepe. Neolithic hunter-gatherers who erected massive monoliths in central Turkey 11,500 years ago had command of geometry and a much more complex society than previously thought, archaeologists say. The enigmatic monoliths built some 11,500 years ago at Göbekli Tepe have been puzzling archaeologists and challenging preconceptions about prehistoric culture since their discovery in the 1990s. Chiefly, how could hunter-gatherers with a supposedly primitive societal structure build such monumental stone circles on this barren hilltop in what is today southeastern Turkey? How could a largely nomadic society at the dawn of agricultural marshal the resources and know-how to create what its discoverers have dubbed the oldest known temple in the world? Well, they couldn't. That's the interesting point about this. They simply couldn't have done it. If anything, a discovery by Israeli archaeologists suggests the Göbekli Tepe construction project was even more complex than previously thought and required an amount of planning and resources thought to be impossible for these times. Their study of the three oldest stone enclosures at Göbekli Tepe have revealed a hidden geometric pattern, superficially an equilateral triangle, underlying the entire architectural plan of these structures. This implies that, in contrast to the prevailing assumption among Göbekli Tepe researchers until now, that these circles were planned as a single unit and possibly built at the same time, says archaeologists Jill Hackley and Avi Gopher of Tel Aviv University. Thus, thousands of years before the invention of writing or the wheel, the builders of Göbekli Tepe evidently had some understanding of geometric principles that they could apply them to their construction plans, including the study published in January in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal. So let that sink in for a moment. These people had advanced mathematics, but no wheels. Now that makes no sense. The initial discovery of the site was a big surprise, and we are now showing that its construction was even more complex than we thought, says Haklay, an Israeli Antiquities Authority archaeologist and PhD candidate at Tel Aviv University. Well, that's a worry. He's only a candidate, which means he hasn't actually completed his doctorate yet. The first phase of construction at Göbekli Tepe, or pot-bellied hill, that's what it actually means. Normally these things have really nice names that mean a super temple or a historical thing. This means pot-bellied hill, so it's a hill that just has a big lump on it and looks like a fat man laying down, so they called it pot-bellied hill. In Turkish, has been dated between 12,000 and 11,000 years ago. This is the earliest part of the Neolithic, also known as pre-pottery Neolithic, or PPNA. Around the time people in the northern Levant began domesticating plants and animals, launching the agricultural revolution. So they're just starting to become farmers. Again, makes no sense. The site's builders erected several concentric stone circles, setting into the walls massive T-shaped pillars that reached almost 6 meters in height. Many of these were decorated with reliefs or animals and other motifs. These circles appear to have been built around pairs of pillars positioned roughly in the center. Only 4 circles from the PPNA, dubbed enclosures A, B, C and D, have been excavated so far, but surveys have shown that there are at least 15 more scattered around the hill, as well as half a dozen other similar unexplored sites across southeastern Turkey. An unexpected pattern. The new study focused on enclosures B, C and D, which are known to be slightly older than A, based on the assumption that such a massive construction project would have been beyond the capacities of the small, non-sedentary groups that usually comprise hunter-gatherer societies. Most scholars have assumed that the circles at Göbekli Tepe have to have been built gradually over a long period of time. This is an assumption based on our guesses about how they lived, which is really, really stupid, because the very fact that this thing exists means that everything we know about the history of it is wrong, but we're still using that wrong assumption to judge everything on. So do you see how ridiculous this is? We've got this wrong assumption, and we're still using that as a reference point to study something that proves that it was wrong in the first place. This is insane. Literally, this is insane. There's a lot of speculation that the structures were built successively, possibly by different groups of people, but that one was covered up while the next one was being built, but there is no evidence that they are not contemporaneous or built at the same time. Haklay tells Haaretz. Why do they have silly names? Why can't they just be called Bob or Dave? Haklay was formerly working as an architect, applied a method called archaeological formal analysis, which is used to trace the planning principles and methods used in the design of existing structures. So some pictures to show you. Using an algorithm, he identified the center points of the 3 irregular stone circles. Not surprisingly, these points fell roughly midway between the pair of central pillars in each enclosure. What was surprising, however, was that those 3 points could be linked to form a nearly perfect equilateral triangle. Specifically, the vertices are about 25 centimeters away from forming a perfect triangle with sides measuring 19.25 meters each. I certainly did not expect this, Haklay recalls. The enclosures all have different sizes and shapes, so the odds that these center points would form an equilateral triangle by chance are very low. The finding confirmed previous research by Haklay and Gopher at other sites, showing that that architects in the Neolithic or even in the late Paleolithic didn't build shelters and homes haphazardly, but had the ability to apply rudimentary geometric principles and create standard units of measurement. And this is all before we had wheels. At Göbekli Tepe, the discovery of the pattern is evidence of a complex abstract design that could not be realized without first creating a scaled floor plan, Haklay says. At a time when the invention of writing was millennia away, thousands of years away, this could be accomplished, for example, by using reeds of equal length to create a rudimentary blueprint on the ground, he suggests. Right, so faced with the evidence that these people carved these stones to almost perfect dimensions, they resort to the idea that They didn't have a language, they didn't have any understanding of maths, and they laid the whole thing out by laying down pieces of grass. And that's the best they can come up with. Each enclosure subsequently went through a long construction history with multiple modifications, but at least in an initial phase, they started as a single project. The archaeologist concludes, the implication is that a single project at Göbekli Tepe was 3 times larger than previously thought and required 3 times as much manpower, a level that is unprecedented in hunter-gatherer societies, or at least they got that right. Suddenly, social stratification. The construction would have required hundreds or maybe thousands of workers and could be taken as a mark of the birth of a more stratified society with levels of sophistication previously only seen in later sedentary groups of farmers, says Gopher, an archaeologist professor at Tel Aviv University and Hackley's PhD advisor, so his teacher, in other words. This is where it starts. The sharing instinct of hunter-gatherer societies is reduced and inequality is growing. Someone is running the show. I don't know if it's shamans or political leaders, but this is a society that has an architect and somebody who initiates a project like this and has the power to make it happen, Gopher says. So we're seeing evidence of the first leadership. That's not necessarily true. We don't even know. There's no evidence to support that. What we're seeing is the first evidence historically of people coming together to achieve an end. So you've got to assume that they had a common goal and that it was important, very important. And this is before we had money, so there's no way that they were getting paid to do this. The new study is an amazing contribution to the understanding of this enigmatic site, says Anna Belfer-Cohen, an archaeology professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and an expert on late prehistory. However, given that there are many stone circles at Göbekli Tepe and other sites nearby, they have yet to be excavated. We don't know if the same conclusions can be applied to all of these enclosures. Cautions Belfer-Cohen, who did not take part in the study. So why comment? This article is not as well written as I'd hoped. These 3 enclosures may have been built together, but it doesn't mean that they were not constructed as single units, perhaps by different groups, she says. We only have uncovered the tip of the iceberg of this phenomenon, but it's more likely that there were many different groups that consider this entire area sacred and converged on it to erect these enclosures, rather than a single group that went crazy and just constructed these complexes day and night. The New World Order. Now, that's something we should be talking about in class, especially as we're living through it at the moment. How and why Neolithic hunter-gatherers would mobilize the massive resources needed to build Göbekli Tepe and other sites like this is the subject of much speculation, and it is only speculation. We have no idea what these things actually were. While some researchers have interpreted the structures as residential spaces, most archaeologists see little evidence of this and consider the sheer monumentality of the complexes and the richness of its iconography as evidence of a ritual purpose. So in other words, it had some religious or other significance because it's just too big and too grand. People don't go in for that. People normally, when they want living spaces, build convenient living spaces. They build boxes. We don't build huge temples to ourselves. Only idiots do that. The massive T-shaped pillars and the reliefs on them, animal and animal-like, have been interpreted as totems, perhaps representations of protective spirits, possibly long-deceased ancestors, some of whom were believed to take on animal form. This is all conjecture, by the way. We don't know any of this because there is no written history from there. The idea that the zoomorphic and anthropomorphic images may represent the venerated dead was reinforced by the recent discovery of modified skull fragments buried at the site, which many researchers consider to be evidence of ancestor cults, similar to the interpretation of stone masks found throughout the Levant from about 9,000 years ago. It was actually a toss-up between the skull fragment story and this story, but I thought this gave us a better introduction to the site as a whole. Yeah, there's evidence of skull fragments which have been cut, grooved, and drilled. Now, we don't know if it's post-mortem. Now, why were they drilling into each other's skulls? That's, at the very least, that's medicine. And at the very least, it's an understanding that the seat of humanity lives inside the head, not the heart. So these people have worked out that the brains were the key to the function of the entire body. At the very least, this shows medical science, or at least the beginning of medical science. The identification of the hidden geometric patterns strengthens the interpretation of Göbekli Tepe as a cultic site, says Hackley and Gopher. The southern side of the triangle runs through the central stone pillars of enclosure B and C, creating a base for the polygon. The axis, perpendicular to the line, runs through the entire site and ends in the centre of enclosure D, which can be interpreted as the top of the pyramid. Excuse me, long night, no coffee yet. I tried to get coffee. I ordered a mocha frappe, because I like frappes, they go slower. And what was it, an iced chocolate thing with sugar in it, which is exactly the opposite of what I ordered. So I haven't had any coffee yet, so excuse me. This suggests that the builders understood and wished to represent the idea of a hierarchy, perhaps intended to crystallise the new order of a less equal and more stratified society. Hackley and Gopher maintain. This is very typically Israeli, the idea that there has to be a hierarchy, that we have to follow these leaders, because their entire religion is based on the idea that their God told them that they could have something and that they had a religious entitlement to take over this part of the world forever, and it was going to be theirs. They really do buy into this whole religious idea. They consider themselves God's chosen people, that they were put on earth to rule mankind. They actually believe this. So the idea, I find it very difficult to understand that a group of people would form a hierarchy and then start to worship the boss. It doesn't make any sense, because these people have a choice. If they were truly hunter-gatherers, why would they want to give up their lifestyle? They would only do it to improve their position in some way, not to follow a leader, unless the leader was way, way, way more advanced than they were. And this is something that ties back into the Stargate movie I wanted you to see. People are going to follow a leader. They're going to follow a leader for a good reason. Either they have no choice, or the leader offers something that will massively change the way they live their lives. The stratification was not limited to human relations. It suggests a change in the perceived relationship between humans and nature, the archaeologist suggests. That's because of what is found at the top of the triangle at the centre of enclosure D, where the site's signature T-shaped pillars have been interpreted as stylized human figures. The central monoliths of enclosure D are the only ones that are clearly anthropomorphic, bearing reliefs of hands, a belt, and possibly a loincloth. Placing these human depictions at the top of this triangle would have been a powerful message and represented an ideological departure from the animal-centric canons of Paleolithic art. In Paleolithic art, humans are rare, and this is true here as well. But you start to see the change, the beginning of an anthropocentric worldview in which animals and plants are no longer equal to humans, but are subordinated to them. Gopher tells Haaretz, which is actually the beginning of the destruction of our entire worldview. Once we start to accept that humans are superior to animals, then we're also accepting that other things could be superior to us. We're not treating everybody as equal anymore. We're creating a staggered hierarchical society which never ends well. Look around. Look around yourself. It never ends well. We've ended up with 1% of the population owning everything and the rest of us being treated as little more than animals. And that's what this could have led to. And that's what these archaeologists are saying that they're witnessing here at Göbekli Tepe. In other words, Göbekli Tepe may have been designed consciously or unconsciously to represent and perhaps explain humanity's growing ability to manipulate its environment, which in the coming centuries would lead to the first domesticated crops in this very region, the researchers say. It doesn't hold a lot of water. There's a lot of evidence that all of the crops that we domesticated, we did at a certain time, thousands and thousands of years before this happened. The end of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle is more of an ideological transformation than an economic or technological one, Gopher maintains. I disagree. Hunter-gatherers cannot domesticate anything. It's against their worldview, which is based on equality and trust. Once that ideology changes, the entire structure of society is transformed and a new world is born. I totally disagree. I think all of society, even where we are today, is built on trust. You can break any law you like. One time I was working in a video game shop and we hired this Saturday boy just to work in the evenings and Saturdays. And he came into the stock room, looked around and said, "Oh my God," he swore actually, "Oh my God, I can steal anything." So I just said to him, "No, sorry, out the stock room please, you're sacked, go. There's a couple of dollars to pay for your bus fare home, get out." Because eventually What stops people stealing isn't the police, it's not the threat of going to prison, it's trust. It's trust. The whole of society is built on trust. I could just refuse to do my job, but you have to trust me to get in there and do it. And that's what basically this is all based on. Society, modern society especially, is based on trust. And I think this is very typically an Israeli concept that that trust is something that should be gotten rid of and replaced with a hierarchical structure with them at the top. I think that's a very negative worldview, and I think it's an outdated worldview. And I don't think that a lot of what they've said about the monument actually holds true. I think they've used a lot of outdated and just plain wrong, proven wrong ideologies to examine this site, and I don't think that they're going to get to the bottom of it. I think it's interesting that they found the triangle. I've posted pictures of that. I think it's interesting that they found that, and there's some evidence there that these people understood a lot more than we think they do. But all of the mounting evidence of this site proves that we've got it wrong, and you can't take our wrong worldview and apply it. It'd be like you thinking that 1 and 1 equals 5, and then using that to work out 10. You are never going to get to the answer because your initial premise is completely wrong. And that's what they're doing here. They've got the entirely wrong answer, and they're trying to build on it, already knowing that it's the wrong answer. I think we need to go back and start again, looking at the evidence and letting the evidence build us towards a conclusion that actually makes sense. And that's where science is going wrong. Science is increasingly dogmatic, and it's looking for ways to prove what we think we know rather than using the evidence to guide us to the truth. And that's a very different thing. Okay guys, so that's the website. Now I've given you a link. I've given you a link to the article. It's an interesting article. It's pretty well written, if not particularly well supported by evidence. It's interesting anyway. So have a look at the questions on the quiz. Now it is just an exercise quiz. I'm not going to be grading it because I really don't know we have no idea what's coming in the next few weeks. So we're just going to try and just keep going for now. So guys, do the comprehension exercise, and I'll come back in a little while with the answers.